What happens when Hollywood royalty clashes with America's sweetheart in a battle that shocks millions of viewers? In just 29 seconds, a friendly conversation turns into the most explosive meltdown daytime television has ever witnessed. Before we dive into this unbelievable drama, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations they don't want you to see, and the truth behind those perfect celebrity smiles. Last night's episode of The Kelly Clarkson Show was supposed to be another feel-good conversation with legendary actor Richard Gere. Instead, viewers got a front-row seat to a train wreck that nobody saw coming. What started as light banter quickly spiraled into a heated argument that ended with Gere being escorted off the set. This is what really went down. The show opened like any other episode. Kelly came out with her signature energy, greeting the audience with that warm smile everyone knows and loves. She introduced Richard Gere as one of Hollywood's most respected actors, someone she'd admired for years. The audience erupted in applause as Gere walked onto the stage, waving and flashing that famous smile. He sat down across from Kelly, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed perfectly normal. Kelly started with softball questions about his latest project, a documentary he'd been working on. Gere talked about his passion for humanitarian work, his travels around the world, and his commitment to various causes. The audience seemed engaged, nodding along as he spoke about bringing attention to important global issues. Kelly smiled and praised his dedication, calling him an inspiration. But then something shifted in the atmosphere. You could feel it through the screen. Kelly transitioned to talking about Gere's personal life, specifically asking about his views on Hollywood activism and whether celebrities should use their platforms to speak about politics. It seemed like an innocent enough question, the kind of thing hosts ask all the time. Gere paused for a moment, his expression changing slightly. He leaned back in his chair and said he believed celebrities had not just a right, but a responsibility to speak up about injustice. Kelly nodded, but then she followed up with something unexpected. She mentioned how some people feel that actors should stick to entertainment and leave politics to politicians. She wasn't necessarily saying she agreed, but she was playing devil's advocate, asking Gere how he responds to that criticism. That's when Gere's demeanor completely changed. His jaw tightened and his eyes narrowed. He looked directly at Kelly and said, "That's exactly the kind of thinking that allows terrible things to happen in this world. Staying silent when you have a voice is cowardice." The audience went quiet. You could hear people shifting in their seats, unsure if this was part of some planned bit or if things were actually getting tense. Kelly's smile faltered for just a second, but she tried to keep things light. She laughed awkwardly and said she was just asking what other people think, not necessarily her own opinion. But Gere wasn't backing down. He leaned forward, his voice getting more intense. "You know what the problem is? Shows like this. You bring people on, you ask them to share their truth, and then you play both sides, like you're hosting some kind of debate club. You can't have it both ways, Kelly." The audience gasped. Some people looked shocked, others excited to see drama unfold live. Kelly's face flushed red, and for a moment, she seemed genuinely caught off guard. She tried to laugh it off again, saying, "Richard, I'm just trying to have a conversation here. I think you might be misunderstanding what I'm asking." Gere shook his head, cutting her off. "No, I understand perfectly. You want the appearance of depth without actually taking a stand on anything. It's safe, it's ratings friendly, but it's also meaningless." Now Kelly's expression changed too. The warmth was gone, replaced by something much colder. She sat up straighter in her chair and said, "Okay, hold on a second. I invite you onto my show to talk about your work, to give you a platform, and this is what you do? Attack me?" Gere fired back immediately. "A platform? You think you're doing me a favor? I've been in this industry longer than you've been alive. I don't need your platform, Kelly. I came here thinking we could have a real conversation about things that actually matter. Instead, you're more concerned about not offending anyone in your audience." The tension was suffocating. Kelly's producer could be seen off camera making hand signals, probably trying to get them to move on or cut to commercial. But Kelly wasn't backing down anymore either. She looked Gere dead in the eye and said, "You know what, Richard? Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is that you're so far up on your high horse that you can't have a normal conversation without turning it into some kind of moral lecture." The audience erupted. Some people were clapping, others looked horrified, and a few were definitely filming on their phones, even though they weren't supposed to. Gere's face turned red, and he stood up from his chair. "High horse, I'm trying to use whatever influence I have to make a difference in the world. What are you doing besides singing songs and playing it safe?" Kelly stood up too, her voice rising. "Playing it safe? I've worked my ass off to build this show, to create something positive, where people can come and feel good for an hour. I'm sorry if that's not revolutionary enough for you, but not everything has to be a damn protest." Gere laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was bitter and mocking. Feel good for an hour. That's the problem right there. That's exactly what's wrong with this country. Everyone wants to feel good instead of facing reality. They want to be comfortable instead of informed. Kelly's hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady and angry. "Get off my stage, Richard. If you hate this show so much, if you think it's so beneath you, then leave. Nobody's forcing you to be here." Gere stared at her for a long moment, and you could see the anger radiating off both of them. The audience was completely silent now, watching this train wreck unfold in real time. Then Gere took a step closer to Kelly, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that the microphone still picked up. "You invited me here, and now you're kicking me out because I'm telling the truth? This is pathetic." Kelly didn't back away. She stood her ground and said, "No, I'm asking you to leave because you came on my show and disrespected me, my team, and everyone who watches. You want to lecture people? Go start your own damn show." The production crew was moving now, and you could see security guards starting to approach the stage. Gere turned to look at them, then back at Kelly. He ripped off his microphone, the cord making a loud popping sound through the speakers. He threw it onto the chair and said, "I don't need to be here for this. You're all living in a fantasy world." Kelly crossed her arms and replied, "Then go. The door's right there." And that's exactly what he did. Richard Gere turned away from Kelly, completely ignoring the audience, and walked straight toward the exit. His footsteps echoed through the silent studio as everyone watched in complete shock. Someone in the audience yelled out, trying to get him to stay, but he didn't even acknowledge them. He pushed through the backstage door and disappeared, leaving Kelly standing alone on the stage. Kelly stood there for a moment, her chest heaving as she tried to compose herself. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay silent. Some people started clapping hesitantly, showing support for Kelly, while others just sat there with their mouths open. Kelly ran a hand through her hair, clearly shaken by what had just happened. She looked at the camera and said, "Well, that was unexpected. I guess we're going to take a commercial break." But her voice cracked slightly as she said it, and you could tell she was barely holding it together. The camera lingered on her face for just a second too long before cutting away, and in that moment you could see she was genuinely upset. This wasn't some planned publicity stunt or fake drama for ratings. This was real, raw emotion from two people who had completely lost control of the situation. The commercial break felt like it lasted forever for everyone watching at home. Social media immediately exploded with clips of the confrontation. Within minutes, hashtags were trending, and people were taking sides. Some defended Gere, saying he was right to call out the superficiality of talk shows and celebrity culture. Others stood behind Kelly, arguing that Gere was rude and ungrateful, attacking someone who was just trying to do her job and provide entertainment. But what made this confrontation so shocking wasn't just the yelling or the personal attacks. It was the fundamental clash of philosophies playing out in real time. On one side, you had Richard Gere, a man who has spent decades using his fame to advocate for causes he believes in, someone who genuinely thinks celebrities have a moral obligation to speak up about serious issues. On the other side, you had Kelly Clarkson, a woman who built her career on being relatable and positive, someone who believes her job is to give people a break from the heaviness of the world. When the show came back from commercial, Kelly was composed but clearly still rattled. She didn't address what had happened with Gere directly. Instead, she moved on to her next segment like a professional, though anyone watching could tell her heart wasn't in it. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and her usual enthusiasm was dimmed. The rest of the show felt awkward and forced, with the audience never fully recovering from the tension they'd witnessed. Behind the scenes, according to people who were there, chaos had erupted. Producers were scrambling, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. Security had followed Gere to make sure he actually left the building, and there were reportedly more heated words exchanged in the hallway. Gere's team was frantically making phone calls, while Kelly's team was doing damage control, trying to decide whether to cut the segment from the broadcast or let it air. In the end, they let it air, and it became the most watched moment in the show's history. The argument between Kelly and Richard touched on something deeper than just two celebrities having a bad day. It exposed a real divide in how people think about fame and responsibility. Should entertainers entertain and leave the heavy stuff to others? Or do they have a duty to use their massive platforms for more than just selling products and promoting movies? Gere clearly believes the latter. Throughout his career, he's been outspoken about human rights, particularly regarding Tibet and other causes that many Hollywood figures avoid because they're politically sensitive. He's someone who doesn't care if speaking up costs him roles or makes him unpopular with studios. For him, staying silent is worse than any professional consequences he might face. Kelly, on the other hand, has built her brand on positivity and relatability. She's the girl next door who won American Idol and turned herself into a beloved television personality. Her show is designed to be a feel-good hour where celebrities come on, share fun stories, play games, and promote their projects. It's comfort television, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Millions of people love her precisely because she doesn't make everything heavy and political. But when these two worldviews collided on stage, neither was willing to back down or find middle ground. Gere saw Kelly's approach as part of the problem, a distraction that keeps people from engaging with important issues. Kelly saw Gere's approach as self-righteous and insulting, an attack on her and her audience for not being serious enough. The confrontation escalated so quickly because both felt personally attacked. Gere felt like Kelly was dismissing the importance of activism by playing devil's advocate. Kelly felt like Gere was calling her shallow and meaningless. Neither was really listening to the other anymore. They were just defending their positions and attacking the other person's character. What started as a question about celebrity activism turned into something much more personal and nasty. Gere accused Kelly of being more concerned with ratings than truth. Kelly accused Gere of being condescending and ungrateful. They both said things they probably didn't mean, or at least said them in ways they wouldn't have if they weren't so angry. The moment when Kelly told Gere to get off her stage was the point of no return. Up until then, maybe they could have pulled back, apologized, and moved on. But once she said those words, it became a power struggle. Gere wasn't going to back down and let Kelly throw him off her show, so he took control of the situation by leaving on his own terms. He threw down the microphone like a gauntlet, making it clear he was choosing to leave, not being forced out. And Kelly, to her credit, didn't chase after him or try to smooth things over. She stood there and let him go, refusing to back down from her position. In that moment, both of them were more concerned with winning the argument than salvaging the interview or their professional relationship. The walk-off was dramatic and definitive. Gere didn't hesitate, didn't look back, didn't give anyone a chance to convince him to stay. He made his statement and left, and that final image of him pushing through the backstage door became instantly iconic. It was the ultimate "I'm done here" moment. The kind of thing that gets replayed and memed and discussed for years. Kelly's face after he left showed everything. She was angry, hurt, embarrassed, and trying desperately to maintain her composure in front of millions of viewers. That moment of vulnerability, when she told the audience they were going to commercial and her voice cracked, that's what made this feel so real and raw. She couldn't hide her emotions, couldn't put the professional mask back on fast enough. This wasn't two actors reading lines or following a script. This was two real people having a real fight that got out of control in front of a live audience and television cameras. It was uncomfortable and messy, and human in a way that polished talk show television rarely is. The aftermath of the confrontation played out exactly as you'd expect in the age of social media. Everyone had an opinion, think pieces were written. Late-night hosts made jokes about it. Other celebrities weighed in, some supporting Kelly, others defending Gere. The whole incident became a cultural moment that transcended just being about two famous people arguing. But for Kelly and Richard in that moment on stage, none of that mattered yet. They were just two people who had fundamentally different views on what their jobs meant and what their responsibilities were. They both believed they were right, and neither was willing to give an inch. That's what made the confrontation so explosive, and why it ended the only way it could, with one of them walking away. Richard Gere pushed through that backstage door and disappeared into the hallway, leaving behind a shocked audience, a rattled host, and a moment of television that nobody who watched it would ever forget. The door swung shut behind him with a heavy thud that seemed to echo through the entire studio. And just like that, the confrontation was over. Kelly stood alone on her stage, the weight of what had just happened settling over everyone in the room. The bright lights that usually made everything feel cheerful and warm suddenly seemed harsh and unforgiving. This was supposed to be just another episode, another celebrity interview, another hour of light entertainment. Instead, it became the show that everyone would be talking about for months. The audience sat frozen, not sure how to react or what to do. Some people had their phones out, already texting their friends or posting about what they'd just witnessed. Others just stared at the stage in disbelief, trying to process the rapid escalation they'd seen. A few audience members near the front were whispering to each other, their voices carrying just enough to add to the strange, uncomfortable atmosphere that had settled over the studio. Kelly took a deep breath, clearly trying to center herself. You could see her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed down her outfit, a nervous gesture that betrayed how shaken she really was. Her team was probably screaming instructions in her earpiece, but she barely seemed to register them. She was still processing what had happened, still trying to understand how a conversation had turned into a battle so quickly. Behind the scenes, crew members were rushing around in controlled chaos. Producers were making frantic calls, trying to figure out the legal implications of what had just been broadcast live. Security was making sure Gere had actually left the building and wasn't coming back. Assistants were checking on Kelly, making sure she was okay to continue. The whole operation had been thrown into complete disarray by those intense few minutes of confrontation. But on stage, Kelly was alone with her thoughts and the staring eyes of her audience. She looked at the camera, that unblinking lens that had captured every moment of the argument, and you could see her making the choice to push forward. She was hurt and angry, and probably wanted to say a lot more than she did, but she was also a professional who had a show to finish. The commercial break announcement came, and the lights dimmed slightly as the live broadcast cut away. But in the studio, the tension remained thick and heavy. Kelly walked off stage without her usual wave to the audience, without the smile that typically stayed plastered on her face even during breaks. She disappeared behind the curtain, and for a moment, everyone in that studio knew they'd witnessed something that would become television history. Richard Gere, meanwhile, was already in his car by the time Kelly announced the commercial break. He sat in the back seat, his jaw still clenched, his mind probably replaying every word of the argument. He'd made his point in the most dramatic way possible, but at what cost? He'd alienated Kelly, her audience, and probably a good portion of the television-watching public. But he'd also stood by his principles, refused to back down, and made it clear that he wasn't going to play along with what he saw as superficial entertainment. Back in the studio, as the commercial break stretched on, The audience buzzed with conversation. People were taking sides, arguing about who was right and who was wrong. Some thought Kelly had every right to kick Gere off her show for being disrespectful. Others thought Gere was brave for calling out the fake positivity of daytime television. Nobody could agree, and that's what made the whole thing so fascinating. When the show came back from commercial, Kelly did return to finish the episode, but the energy was completely different. She got through her remaining segments with professional grace, but the spark was gone. Every smile seemed forced, every laugh a little hollow. The audience tried to match her energy, tried to pretend everything was normal, but everyone knew it wasn't. The segment with Richard Gere that was supposed to be a highlight of the episode had instead become the moment that overshadowed everything else. None of the other guests or segments mattered anymore. The only thing anyone would remember from this episode was the argument, the accusations, and that final moment when Richard Gere walked off the set. As the show wrapped up and Kelly said her goodbyes to the audience, you could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She'd made it through, but just barely. The professional mask had held, but everyone could see the cracks. This wasn't how she'd imagined her day going, and it definitely wasn't the kind of viral moment she'd wanted for her show. The studio audience filed out, still talking animatedly about what they'd witnessed. They'd come expecting a fun taping of their favorite talk show, and instead got a front-row seat to one of the most dramatic celebrity confrontations in recent memory. Their phones were already blowing up with messages from friends and family who'd seen it live on television, asking if it was real, asking what the atmosphere was like in the room. In the days that would follow, this confrontation would be analyzed and discussed endlessly. People would debate who was right, what it meant for celebrity culture, and whether talk shows should be more substantive or stay lighthearted. But in that moment, as Richard Gere's car pulled away from the studio and Kelly sat in her dressing room trying to decompress, all that mattered was the raw, unfiltered human emotion that had exploded across the stage. This was the moment when the polished veneer of daytime television cracked wide open, revealing the real tensions and conflicts that exist beneath the surface of celebrity culture. It was messy, uncomfortable, and completely unforgettable. Richard Gere had walked off the set, but the impact of those 29 seconds would last far longer than anyone could have predicted.